let me do this, because I think it's valuable that the American people get a sense of what you've refused to answer today.
Let's dive into this exchange between Senator Adam Schiff and Attorney General Pam Bondi.
So these are just some of the questions you refused to answer, or have answered with personal attacks on members of this committee. You were asked whether you consulted with career ethics lawyers, as you promised you would do during your nomination hearing, when you approved the president receiving a $400 million gift from the Qataris. You refused to answer that question. You were asked who or what role you may have played, or who played the role in asking that Trump's name be flagged in any of the Epstein documents gathered by the FBI. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether Homan kept the $50,000 bribe money. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether Homan paid taxes on the $50,000 bribe money. You refused to answer that question. You were asked, did career prosecutors find insufficient evidence to charge James Comey? You refused to answer that question. You were asked, how are military strikes on these boats in the Caribbean legal? And you refused to even answer that question.
You were asked, a law degree,
excuse me. You were asked, did you discuss indicting James Comey with the president? You refused to answer that question. You were asked, did you approve the firing of antitrust lawyers who disagreed with the Hewlett-Packard merger? You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether you support a restoration fund for violent insurrections to attack the Capitol on January 6th. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether you were firing career professionals, career prosecutors, just because they worked on January 6th investigations. You refused to answer that question. You were asked by my California colleague whether you believe government officials, like immigration officials, have to abide by court orders. You wouldn't even answer that question. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing.
Oversight?
Excuse me, you can attack me after my time is over.
You've attacked all of us, including President Trump, for your entire career.
You can attack me later, and I know you've got plenty of canned attacks. We've heard them all day to day.
Canned attacks on you?
This is supposed to be...
No one needs a canned attack on you.
Regular order, Madam Chair. I'm trying to speak. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing of the Justice Department. And it comes in the wake of an indictment called for by the president of one of his enemies. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing, and it comes in the wake of revelations that a top administration official took $50,000 in a bag, and this department made that investigation go away. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing when dozens of prosecutors have been fired simply because they worked on cases investigating the former president. This is, and now
what
the current president.
What about the fires in California?
And
do you care about that, Senator Schiff?
This is supposed to be an oversight hearing in which members of Congress can get serious answers to serious questions about
the riots in LA serious?
About the cover-up of corruption, about the prosecution of the president's enemies. And
I think you owe the president an apology.
When will it be
frankly,
that the members of this committee on a bipartisan basis demand answers to those questions and refuse to accept
Clearly you're a failed lawyer
refuse
because
to accept,
you don't understand when someone can and cannot answer a question.
Refuse to accept personal slander as an answer to those questions.
Personal slander?
With
will
that,
you apologize
Madam Chair,
to Donald Trump for slandering him? Personal slander.
Senator
may I ask unanimous consent, Madam Chair, to introduce into the record the statement of 1,000 former Justice Department officials who warned that the Comey indictment is a democracy-threatening abuse of power. May I also request unanimous consent for the introduction into the record of 282 former career officials at the Justice Department raising an alarm who were voluntarily or involuntarily forced to leave the department because of improper actions taken by the Department of Justice. May I introduce, with unanimous consent, the Justice Department manual that talks about when initiating and declining charges are subject to impermissible considerations. And finally, Madam Chair, may I introduce the letter from Michael Ben-Ari, a career counterterrorism prosecutor, DOJ, a letter he nailed to his door, which concludes by urging officials to do the right thing, for the right reasons, to follow the facts and the law, and raises the alarm that the decision to remove experienced career officials from U.S. attorneys' offices, the FBI, and critical parts of DOJ undermines our country's abilities to counter terrorist organizations, malign nation-state actors, and countless others that seek to harm our nation and its citizens. And he believes that the priority is prosecuting the president's enemies
or are you admitting
rather than
Bondi,
protecting
Ms.
the
Bondi,
country.
one moment.
May I have unanimous consent to enter these into the record?
Without objection?
Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Britt.
Senator Moody, may I clarify one thing he entered in the record? I just want to say that I believe he entered a letter by 200 and something former employees. Well, I believe the spokesperson for that letter was also the spokesperson for Jack Smith.
If you want a masterclass in how oversight breaks down in real time, this hearing is it. Not because Adam Schiff was grandstanding. Not because Democrats were being dramatic. But because, over and over again, the Attorney General of the United States simply refused to answer basic, legitimate oversight questions, and then tried to paper over that refusal with personal attacks. What Schiff did here wasn't flashy. It wasn't theatrical. It was methodical. It was devastating. Because instead of arguing hypotheticals or trading insults, he did something very simple. He put the unanswered questions on the record, one by one, so the American people could hear exactly what the Department of Justice will not explain. And once you hear that list out loud, it's impossible to unhear it. And here's the part that should really sink in, because what we watched in that hearing wasn't just an uncomfortable exchange between a senator and an attorney general. It was a stress test of the entire oversight system, and the system bent. Adam Schiff wasn't asking abstract questions. He wasn't speculating. He wasn't inventing scandals. He was asking about specific actions, specific decisions, and specific refusals to explain those decisions. And the response he got, again and again, was silence wrapped in hostility. That matters, because silence from power is never neutral. When an attorney general refuses to say whether she followed her own ethics commitments, that's not a procedural issue. That's a trust issue. When she refuses to explain whether political considerations influenced prosecutorial decisions, that's not legal caution. That's institutional corrosion. And when she won't even affirm that government officials are bound by court orders, that's not ambiguity. That's a flashing red light. This is how democratic backsliding actually looks in real life. It doesn't come with tanks in the streets or constitutions being torn up on camera. It comes through hearings like this, where basic questions go unanswered, where accountability is treated as an attack, and where oversight is reframed as harassment. And notice something else. Schiff didn't ask Congress to take his word for it. He put the record on the table. Former DOJ officials, career prosecutors, the department's own manuals, letters from people who dedicated their lives to public service and walked away warning that something is deeply wrong. That's not partisan outrage, that's institutional alarm. What's especially troubling is how normalized this behavior is becoming. We're now at a point where an attorney general can sit before Congress, decline to answer whether corruption investigations were buried, whether prosecutors were purged for political reasons, whether discussions with the president influenced indictments, and the expectation is that this is just how it goes. It shouldn't be. Oversight hearings exist precisely for moments like this, when power needs to explain itself. When those explanations are withheld, Congress is supposed to push harder, not move on. Because if unanswered questions become the new baseline, accountability becomes optional. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This doesn't just affect Democrats or Republicans. It affects everyone who lives under the assumption that the law is applied consistently, that prosecutors aren't punished for doing their jobs, and that justice isn't contingent on political loyalty. Once a Justice Department starts treating criticism as slander and questions as attacks, it stops functioning as an independent institution and starts behaving like a political shield. That's the danger Schiff was trying to expose. Not that one official refused to answer, but that the system is increasingly tolerant of refusal itself. That we're being conditioned to accept non-answers as normal and deflection as sufficient. And the question we're left with isn't about Adam Schiff or Pam Bondi or even Donald Trump. The real question is this: how much silence are we willing to accept before oversight becomes meaningless? How many unanswered questions does it take before accountability stops existing in practice, even if it still exists on paper? Because democracy doesn't fail when laws disappear. It fails when laws stop being enforced evenly. And it doesn't collapse when officials break rules. It collapses when no one can get a straight answer about whether the rules still matter. That's what made this moment so important. Schiff wasn't just listing refusals. He was documenting a pattern for the record, for history, and for the public. And whether anything changes depends on whether those records are ignored or finally taken seriously. If you think these refusals are a problem, say so in the comments. If you think oversight still matters, hit like. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this, because these hearings aren't just noise. They're warnings.